Welcome to episode 67 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning talking to you here from my little cave here in southeast London. It's January 2023, it's bloody freezing, and this is the second episode of the month. A little later than expected, but I managed to get a bunch of work for January that I wasn't necessarily expecting. The life of a freelancer, it never gets boring. If this is the first time you've listened to the podcast, welcome. You have about an hour or so of film history chat ahead of you. Please do check out some or all of the previous 66 episodes. You've missed some great ones. They're all great. If you are a regular listener, you'll know the deal, and thanks for your continued support. If you do like my work, and this is work, albeit work that I love, then please visit patreon.com/Jamie Benning. That's JAMIEBENNING. Patreon being spelled Patreon. You can now support the podcast as well by buying some Filmumentaries merch, including Filmumentaries logo mugs, t-shirts, bags, bottles, and even socks. Yes, socks. You can be walking around listening to the podcast with the podcast on your feet. It doesn't make any sense, but there you go. Also t-shirts with the Inside Jabber and Inside Jaws posters on them. Why not buy one for your next film fair or film convention? I doubt there'll be many people wearing one there. Pretty cool. All of that and more can be found at filmumentaries.creator-spring, spring.com. I'll post both those links that I've just mentioned in the show notes as well. Thanks for the feedback on the Lee Unkrich episode, number 66, earlier this month. It was great to talk to Lee about his mega book project, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And I may or may not have purchased one of them. It depends on how my wife reacts when I finally admit it to myself and her. Let's just gloss over that. Please also remember my feature-length and short filmumentary video projects are still available on vimeo.com. So that's vimeo.com/filmumentaries. Again, I'll put that in the show notes. For any of you that have only found me via the podcast, you might not know my previous stuff. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, so for this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with the ultra-talented and lovely human being, Jean Bolte. That's Bolte, rhymes with Nick Nolte, as she told me. Jean worked in the film industry for many years. She started in wigs and beards and ended up working on Labyrinth. Then moved to ILM in time for Willow, for which she was a model maker. The thumbnail for the episode shows Jean working on an ostrich for the famous morphing scene from that movie. She then went on to work on films like Hook, Jumanji, Men in Black, The Phantom Menace. Well, the list just goes on. Lots of huge movies, finishing her career on Indiana Jones 5, as she told me. So she's quite excited to see how that's gonna land with the fans, with us. She recently handed in her notice at ILM, but is going to be staying very much in the creative world. She talks about that towards the end. Jean was just so great to talk to. We kind of hit it off immediately. Chatting with her was surprisingly relaxing. Sometimes it can be a bit nerve-wracking talking to people you've not met before. And also very inspiring. You know, she's just got a really nice way of describing what she does and why she does it. And yeah, I was quite inspired by the end of it. So here's my conversation with texture artist and supervisor Jean Bolte, Nick Nolte, remember? And I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. So Jean, you're clearly a very creative person. Where did that kind of journey begin for you?
I think that as a kid, and this is actually it's a question that is close to my heart because I didn't have the confidence to feel that I could ever do, much with art. That seemed to me like those were people who were born, an artist is not, you either are or you're not. And so I was a devoted follower of my local art gallery, which is the Nelson Atkins Gallery in Kansas City, which I think still at that place remains, I think, one of the best galleries in the world. And I go back there, and as soon as I walk in the door, it's like my whole childhood comes back to me. I knew every single piece in that gallery because I would get dropped off there, and I would spend hours wandering all through every bit of that place. Some of it was terrifying, some of the Warhols and things. I was exposing myself to stuff that I found just so confusing and scary, but I also loved that too. So the reason that I'm saying that it's close to my heart is when I do presentations for the schools, which I love doing, because I think if you get those kids at an early enough age, there's a switch that can be flipped. And all kids have such natural creativity that if you look at a kid's composition, when they make it, always feels right. And it's because there's just something innate there. And then they start to doubt themselves when they hit sort of middle school age, teenage or preteen. And when I'll do a presentation, I'll show some of Doug Chang and Christian Altsman's work and stuff, and I'll stop it. And I'll say, okay, I'm sure that there's some of you sitting here who think that you could never do this. And I'm here to tell you that it's not true, that artists are not born, it's all about curiosity, interest, and time. And if you will devote yourself to something that if you care about it enough, your talent will come to you, whatever it is that you have inside of you. It may not be a photoreal piece of work. That may not be the right goal for you, but, don't give up. And I don't know if I've ever, made a difference, but I sort of wish somebody had done that for me when I was that age, because I just did not think that I had it in me, and I never went to art school. But I drifted. I was just so drawn to be drifting back into something where I did draw and paint and sculpt, and I sort of found that I actually didn't have to be a natural born artist. I could find my own way.
Mm-hmm.
And
go on.
Well, I was just going to say it was my natural escape. To me, it's the best drug, and really, what I'm always looking for that. It's kind of a drug that has no side effects. That
Sure, yeah.
I can get completely caught up in something. Painting is kind of the best for me, but also sculpting and other things, that will allow me to just disappear. There's a kind of a euphoria that comes with that. And when I know that I've nailed it, when the scale clicks and you look at it and you're like, okay, I feel that, it's working. That's what I'm going for. That's what I've gone for all my career at ILM. It's like I just want that drug. I want to get high in that way so that I disappear.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the meditative aspect of it, isn't it? And I think I heard you say in another interview, there's this kind of moment where it kind of smells right, I think was the term you used. There is that kind of sensory aspect to it, isn't there? I'm not a particularly creative person. Like as a kid, I was known as one of the best drawers in my school, one of the best artists as a young kid. I kind of lost it in my teenage years, and I've found in recent years just having the iPad with a stylus, I'll doodle away because I know I can rub it out, because I lost my confidence with paper and pencil, when I became a teenager, because I was told I needed to learn business and I needed to learn physical education, all those other things, maths, whatever. But it's really important to kind of refine that, I think, for a lot of people. And it is that meditative aspect. And it's great to hear that you still get that, when you're working. And you paint yourself now. I can see some paintings behind you. Are they yours or?
This one is... That's one, and I also have done I'm doing a series on kind of devil clowns, because ever since Bush and Cheney really started it for me, and then Donald Trump, I just felt that I had to somehow express this craziness in some characters. So yeah.
Well, I can understand that. I've been watching from afar. Well, I've family in the US, so it's, we closely watch politics there. I mean, it's no better here at the moment.
No, it's not.
You were here.
We do. I just want to say that, Jamie, that we share that that sense that when you went to college, that you had to do something sensible. that you had to study something that you could make a living out of.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that I was not, I mean, I came from a very supportive family, but I still had that sense that like art was not something that you could ever feel was a path.
Mm.
And that's another thing I really would like for kids to know, that it's okay to consider that to be, you can, it's not everybody makes a living being an artist, but don't rule it out,
I was going to say, that's great. And I was going to say that, talking of politics here, of course, you were over here for a number of years. What brought you to the UK, and what did you work on while you were here?
Oh, my whole history, Jamie, is being in the right place at the right time. It's just a series, seriously, of incredibly fortunate moments. And so I wanted to get as far away from Kansas City, where I grew up, as I could, because as much as I loved, I mean, I have like I said, a wonderful family. When I went to the gallery, when I went to Nelson Gallery and looked around, and I saw, and on the antiquities and all these, everything in there, that there were beautiful things, but I didn't feel that they were coming to Kansas City. It was hard for me to feel that I could experience that. It's a kind of, it's a landlocked, we don't get a lot of exposure there to traveling and all that. And I just wanted to get away. So I remember I plotted from early days that I would go to college somewhere else. And London was an obvious choice because I studied languages, but that one I didn't have to worry about. So I did. So I went to college in London. I fell in love with England and the UK generally. And then as soon as I could, I finished my degree in the US, and I went back there, and I lived there pretty much the entire time that Margaret Thatcher was in office. So that was like 11 years. Yeah.
Which, politically not the best time, but actually for the film industry, quite a good time, because the tax relief had arrived for film production. And that, of course, is what brought Spielberg and Lucas and Henson and all those guys over.
Exactly. So talk about timing. There were all these big budget American films are being shot at Elstree and Pinewood, and they were actually seeking people to work on them. And so my job that I was being paid cash in hand. I was illegal. And that really wasn't that big of a problem, actually, at the time. I don't know what it's like now, but getting a job cash in hand was that's pretty normal thing to negotiate. So I wasn't paid much. I was in a sort of sweatshop in a basement in the West End, learning to make wigs and mustaches and facial hair. And they paid me by the piece work. And I mean, it truly was, a pretty Dickensian situation, but I didn't care because I was in England, and the rent was practically nothing. And all of a sudden these movies were coming in. And at the same time, I negotiated a marriage of convenience. And so then I was a legal alien instead of an illegal alien. And I was able to work at that point. And I was working in theater, which I think is a fantastic place to learn this business. You learn how to collaborate, and they'll throw anything at you because you're being paid practically nothing working in the theater. But and I was at the RSC. I worked with some of the great actors in the RSC. They all ended up like in Harry Potter movies, over the years. And
was this still doing hair and wigs and things? Was it?
Yes, yeah. And expanding at that point into costumes and that kind of thing. So I got a call. Would I consider coming out to Elstree and interview to work on Tobe Hooper's movie Life Force? Oh, yeah. And that was the beginning for me. So I worked on that, and then it was just jumping from one film to another, which a lot of it was Henson's work. That was a pretty regular employer, and working with Jim Henson was quite an education. And
I bet. And that was what, on Labyrinth, was it, and Dark Crystal?
I did not work on Dark Crystal, although I went and hung around and saw what was going on, and I learned quite a bit just because I had friends there, and I was trying to angle and see how could I get in here, because oh my God, the workshop at Henson's there in Hampstead was just this incredible playground. And So luckily enough, yes, I managed to get crewed on to Labyrinth, and Jim was an extraordinary director and leader of his company. He knew everybody's name. And that wasn't just London, that was also in Canada where they're doing Fraggle, and then New York shop where they're doing all that, of course, the Muppet stuff. But the London shop, I think, was kind of his playground, real, like, I mean, not diving to but push up our profile, but I do think it was kind of an elite place for him to really experiment. And so there were, I mean, for example, there was a year of prototyping before they shot things. There was just so much luxury of trying things and experimenting. And so, yeah, Labyrinth was a blast.
It's a film we watch that film a couple of times every year. Like, I've got daughters aged from 17 to 14 to 8, and they all love that movie. My wife loves that movie. It's just one of those ones that has kind of, it didn't do well initially, did it? I don't think, in the cinema, but it's found a whole new life since then. But what was working on it like? Sorry, you were about to say.
Well, I mean, of course, David Bowie was around, and he liked being on the set and hanging out in the workshop with us. He didn't want to just sit in his Winnebago. So he was just wonderful. But I have to tell you a story that I think back on when I think on working on at Pinewood out in all the setups there. And one of them was Bowie's little castle scene, the interior there where they did Magic Dance, that song. And so David Bowie's on a kind of throne, and there was a vulture up there behind him. There was a pig running around all over the place. Down in the pit were all the puppeteers with all these Muppets that were dancing around like this, music playing, chickens running around. And I was on the set kind of, helping kind of get the puppeteers what they needed. And one of the chickens ran across my lap and laid an egg in my hand.
Madness on the set.
I know. And I took it over to the chicken wrangler and I said, this egg. And they couldn't believe it, because chickens are supposed to go off their lay, right? When they're, it has to be kind of nice and calm for them. And you can't imagine a more chaotic scene. It was just all squished together like that. So anyway, yeah, it's so bizarre. But yeah, I really, really loved working on Labyrinth and being around the Henson family. They were all so creative. Brian was lovely.
Did you get to tend to David Bowie himself?
Not really, no. He had his own people, and that wasn't my area. But I certainly, we chat. I mean, he was right there on the set, just sitting around talking to people.
Yeah.
He loved it. He loved all that.
I spoke to Toby Philpott, who was one of the puppeteers on that film, and he was also inside Jabba the Hutt for Return of the Jedi. And he tells me of his 15 minutes outside with David Bowie, asking him if he had a cigarette, and they just had a chat for 15, 20 minutes, and he wishes it was longer. And, looking back now, he realizes how big a deal that was, I guess. But, we can't.
Yeah, I know. It's so true. When I think back on that, it just seems so normal. And I think a lot of times at ILM, now that we look back on the history of, what we've done there and all these things that we did that were so much fun. But at the time, that was just your day job. You would just go in and of course, having it was a playground working there, especially in the model shop. But it was also just, that was our lives. And I think a lot of us look back on it now and realize how fortunate we were,
Did you ever, coming from the sort of wig side of things, did you want to get into the prosthetic side more? Like the kind of, I guess Dick Smith would have been the name back then.
Dick Smith and Rick Baker, incredible. And I did a little bit of that, but more it was other people were the ones creating the look of things, and I would be doing application.
Right.
Especially on Storyteller. I don't know if you know about that. Henson did a series called Storyteller with John Hurt, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that. It's quite terrifying. That series.
Yes.
I got goosebumps when you mentioned it. Then I haven't thought about it in like 30 odd years.
Well, one of their designers is Ron Muick. I don't know if you're familiar with Ron's work, but he's gone on to do his fine artwork, and he's in galleries all over the world. These hyper real sculptures that he does, which are just astonishing. You know, there's some real talented people back there. One of the people I met was Neil Scanlon,
Yeah.
who is he's still a good friend, and he's carried on, you know, being at the top of his field.
Yeah, I'm aware of Chris's work, obviously, in recent years as well. He's been pretty prolific. How did you find trying to navigate your way into the area that you wanted to work in? Because in the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, we're talking about now, I guess. 80, what was Labyrinth, like 85? The film industry, particularly in England, was very kind of driven by older white men. Yeah. How did you find navigating that kind of landscape?
This was, I still can't quite believe the way that things were handled on the sets. When the construction guys, you know, the chippies, the plasters, and the woodworkers were on the set, it was a terrifying environment for a woman. I didn't find it terrifying. I just thought they were stupid. But I often would ask if I had to go out into the set to do stuff, I would see if somebody else, another woman, wanted to go. Like, do you have anything you need to do on the set?
Really?
Because as soon as you walk into one of those big stages where they're all up on their, you know, of course, safely up on their catwalks, just a chorus of abuse raining down on you. As soon as the woman came in, that was an opportunity for them to all just shout, you know, oh, darling, you know.
Like you're walking into a men's prison.
Oh, exactly right.
Yeah.
And this was before
strange.
Anita Hill. It was before Anita Hill, and there was no recourse. I mean, it wasn't like you could go and say anything about this. This was just standard practice. This is the way it was. And I'll never get going from that. I'll make a jump here, but to the ILM stage. And I had to go out there when I just first started there. I'd only been there a day or two. And I had to go out to the stage to do something. And I kind of crept out there. And the other thing was the unions were so strict. I understand it, but I remember going out and asking Michael Loggy. I said, you know, one of the stagehands there, I said, you know, God, can I move this a little bit? I need to work on this spot. And he's like, yeah, Jean, you can just move it. Just put it back when you're done. Moving lights around, all that. They were incredible gentlemen. And it was a tremendous shock. Now, I think that's possible that the culture is very different now. I can't imagine that kind of behavior is allowed to continue. Yeah. But still that jump from going to what I knew in London to ILM was culture shock for me, to just be treated with respect.
Well, that's good to hear. I hope it isn't purely an Anglo-American thing. I mean, I did speak to Madeline Most, who was a second camera assistant on Star Wars and Empire, and she said similar things. Like, I think the DP of Star Wars said, "Why is there a fucking girl on my set?" You know, so she had to prove herself by climbing up this gantry with a huge, you know, Panavision camera on her back to be one of the lads. You know, kind of very ridiculous.
Yeah. It is ridiculous. But ultimately, that's what I thought. I just thought, this is ridiculous. And I didn't let it stop me. And I think in some ways it kind of helped me to realize that it toughened me up, basically. Yeah. I mean, I'm not talking about the really heinous, you know, Harvey Weinstein situations.
But there's that kind of micro and the macro level that have to exist together for each of them to exist. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So I've been in situations of work. I work in the live television industry where, you know, women are kind of put in certain roles that are traditionally women's roles, like in film. I'm in live TV, but in film it was always like hair and makeup and continuity. Up until recently it was continuity girl, wasn't it?
Yes. Or production. There's there's a lot of women in production.
Yeah. But I've had to kind of say, no, I think she's good enough to do what we do, and I think we should give her the chance, And some people say,
Excellent.
well, it's going to change the dynamic. And it's like, well, for the better, probably. So, why not do it? And no, I'm glad that I've been able to do that occasionally.
Oh,
So,
that's great. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think things have obviously come a long way,
mm,
but and I think there are women who probably had. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, Jamie, I think that I have not had a tremendous sense of ambition throughout my career.
mm,
And I think it's because of that thing I was saying earlier about just wanting to get that euphoria of doing the hands-on work and then seeing it on the screen. Like I can look at something on the screen and I go, I know exactly what that sweat came from. I know exactly about why that leather looks that way. I know, I helped to sculpt this thing and there it is. And as you move up, and I mean, effects supervisors have a very, very specific and the best ones are people I admire. Their breadth of knowledge is enormous. But that wasn't ever something that I had a real desire to do.
mm,
And so I also think that's allowed me to probably have the position that I have, that I didn't feel very oppressed most of the time that I've worked. I haven't felt that I've had to fight, to get recognition. And had I really tried to push harder to have a job that has a bigger profile, then perhaps I'd have other stories to tell.
Yeah, interesting. What was that transition from working in London to then going over and working for ILM? How did that come about?
I got a call, and it was in the middle of the night because they had the time wrong. And they said, which I know, I was actually having a party at the time, and the phone rang.
Oh, it couldn't have been a very good party if you could hear the phone ring. Come on.
So it was about, I don't know, 2 a.m. And Jeff Mann from the model shop asked me if I would come over and work on Willow. And I not only did I say yes to all that, I negotiated my salary. The whole thing was all out of the blue, completely out of the blue. Somebody had recommended me. And then the next morning, how you kind of go through, you're like, well, what happened? And I think, oh my God, I've got a job at ILM. And that was my dream, I have to say, for a long time too. As much as I loved the jobs I was doing at Henson's and other freelancing in England, the work was getting more scarce. Those tax breaks were going away. It was harder and harder to be freelance. And London, as you know, is a kind of tough, depressing city to live in if you are not feeling like you have a great path, to financial security. So I was, of course, thrilled, that ILM called me, plus the fact, just seeing everything that they had done there, I was just so astonished that this is the place. I mean, it was just a well-known fact. It's like ILM is the place where they can do anything. So I couldn't wait. I just got on a plane as soon as I could and went over and worked on Willow. But I wasn't quite settled. It wasn't like I immediately landed and then I had this full-time job. I mean, ILM was also still freelance place, and you would work on a job, but the jobs were coming in regularly. And in fact, the stagehands used to call that the country club. Because it was a place where the work was good and the people were great and the location was wonderful, and you had this sense of being part of a steady community, which was a complete anathema to me. I'd never had anything like that. In England, it was always like you work on a project and then it would disband, and then there was a sort of scrambling that would go along to try to make sure that you were going to be thought of for the next one.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, that's freelance, right? So to come to ILM, it was still sort of a freelance situation, but not in that same sense of having absolutely no security, because they'd kind of say, well, gosh, that went well, we'll call you for the next one. And then it would be a few weeks and the phone would ring. So back and forth. I still wasn't quite out of London. I wasn't quite in San Francisco. And finally, I just said, Jean, what are you doing? Why are you going back to England when, the weather's better? They can shoot, they could set up entire shoots outside.
Not here, no, never in the UK. You couldn't even trust a
Exactly.
sunny summer's day.
Yeah. So I was like, this is, and plus I'm American, clear, as much as
Mm,
I loved and was becoming really more and more of thinking that England was going to be my home forever. There was something that tugged at me to come back. And, I've heard people say this, that there's a kind of about a 10-year span when you
mm,
leave your home that it will come back to you to kind of make you draw you back. And
mhm.
so that I made a permanent decision to come back to ILM, and luckily after that the work was pretty steady, and
Amazing
in
that you
fact,
arrived. Sorry, go on, say that again.
incredibly steady after not very long. Yeah.
Good. And amazing that you arrived on a film like Willow, where there was that kind of very early merging of physical and digital, with the morphing scene between. In fact, I saw today that wonderful picture of you with the ostrich, kind of just touching up the ostrich like with a little paintbrush. And amazing, because what a sequence that was, when we see that character change and morph. I kind of blew my mind at the time, and still today looks fantastic. I showed my daughter the movie recently, and she gasped at that point. She really loved.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow,
she's about
still
7 years old.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my
How
gosh.
did you feel that change was coming? That you were working in the model shop, yet you could feel this kind of new thing appearing, this new digital world appearing? What, or did you just
I'll
have
be
your head
I'll
on
be
mind on the job?
No, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think that all of us in the model shop truly felt that we saw that, and we knew that this was really Dennis at the time was really pushing, to the I mean, there have been plenty of innovations that happened in CG that were very significant, but I have to give Dennis full credit for the fact that early on he saw this. He had this vision that that computers were gonna have open doors. But we didn't really think so. We kind of thought that we would always be on top of that we would be the go-to, the model shop and the stage and shooting, and that this computer graphics would just be there to kind of decorate what we were doing. And so I didn't have a clear idea at the time that nobody did. Nobody could see the tidal wave that was going to hit that company. But I loved going over to the computer graphic. I mean, I've always had a real soft spot for, well, I shouldn't say geeks because, we were all geeks really, but I was fascinated with the computer graphic department right from the get-go. And they were in their own building. They were only just like on a floor of about, I don't know, 12 people or something. It was so small. And I loved going in there to see what they were up to. And much more, I think, to be perfectly honest, I had much more curiosity about that than almost anybody else in the model shop. I think everybody else kind of felt like this was just some dark room and it didn't appeal to them, because, we loved what we were doing. And CG was just this kind of brainy, dark, kind of unhealthy kind of environment, which
Yeah.
is sort of true, really,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And there's you with your mask on, using all sorts of chemicals for your model making. So
Well, you're right about that. We liked our version of the unhealthiness,
yeah,
which,
yeah,
God's truth, yeah, all the chemicals. And you put your mask on in the spray booth and you'd be working, and then you just get tired of wearing that thing and just whip it off after a while. I mean, we really felt invincible. And the more toxic the materials were, the better they tended to work for us.
huh.
So, of course, that we just gravitate to that,
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Was there a particular film with regards to the CGI that you saw that you kind of thought, okay, something has changed? Like I'm trying to kind of work out the years in my head, but I'm guessing The Abyss was one of those films where everybody kind of sat up and went, "Oh, this is different."
The abyss was huge, although I was not there for it. I mean, each leap was very significant, but I remember I went back to, this was when I was sort of in my interim between, am I in London, am I in San Rafael? And I went to see the abyss, and that clinched it for me, Jamie,
Right.
because I remember watching that on the screen, and when that water tentacle comes and she puts her finger in that phase, my world shifted at that point, I think, as significantly as my world shifted when I saw Star Wars. This was just like, there is nothing that ILM can't do, and I need to get back there, and I need to go there. And I think that is really what to me was like, I kind of packed up my apartment and said goodbye, because I have a possibility to be with these people again. And so that one was huge. The T2, the Mercury Man and all that was another huge leap. But of course, the thing that was just, I mean, goes without saying, the thing that was the earthquake was Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Yeah. So you move from, you find yourself kind of interested in the CGI side of things, and you're going up to the department and kind of keeping an eye on it. When was the moment where you finally decided, or it was decided for you, I don't know, that you would make that transition from the kind of physical world into the digital world?
Okay, I'll try not to ramble on because this is a big topic, and I want to make sure that I condense it enough to be interesting. Because, yeah, okay. So what happened was, on Willow, Doug Smythe, who was one of the guys who invented the morph technique, was coming around to the model shop, and I was like, "How do you have all this time to hang out here?" And he's, "Oh, well, I'm rendering." And I was like, "God, that sounds like a great job. You just get to tinker around for a while, and then you take hours off while you're waiting, to process." And so I got to know them, and also because I was hanging around that, and they invited me over to their Friday lunchtime. Every Friday they would make spaghetti, and the entire computer graphics department was in one room, a kitchenette room, sitting around one table, eating spaghetti lunch. And that was their little tradition. And I was really pleased that I was invited to come and take part in this. So it just transpired, that I was, I just had like I had my ear to the ground about what was happening over there throughout. And I didn't do anything in computer graphics, any training, until Jurassic Park was going. And they were well, I mean, I jumped over the whole spaz Mark DePay kind of, dropping an atomic bomb on the company. And, but of course that was a big lure, was just to be around these guys and to see what they were doing. And so I just wanted to learn it. And the company was really generous to all of the model shop. And it wasn't an easy thing for them to offer, because I'm telling you, there was resistance on both sides. There was terrible resistance in the model shop to learning about computer graphics, but there was also a great deal of resistance in some places in the computer graphics department to train those of us who are traditional practical workers. And so luckily there were a few key people who bridged that gap and said, we want to bring these people over and train them and give them an opportunity. And one of them was Steve Williams. I mean, I'm forever indebted to him for that. Steve Rosenbaum was another one. John Burton. They said, okay, we'll invest in them, because we think they may be able. They have a history that is useful to us. They know how to work together. They have an artistic eye. They know about how to construct things. Compositions and all. And all those skills that we had. luckily, some people realized that those were going to be valuable.
Yeah.
Because computer graphics guys at that time were really mostly, apart from people like Steve Williams, were not all that well versed in the arts, So it needed to come together.
Yeah.
So yeah, they trained me to work and I learned a little bit about modeling on Alias, and then I was given the opportunity to paint, and the texture painting was what really, that's what I loved the most. So
you found your forte.
Yes, that's right.
And that was Jumanji?
Well, Jumanji was the first after Jurassic Park came out, and the entire computer graphics department at ILM were walking on water. They went to SIGGRAPH, and it was, as of course you can imagine, just heralded as the breakthrough that it was. So Jumanji was the first time. Well, no, actually, Casper, which was a film that kind of came and went. But I can't tell you how long painting Twinkies and little Hostess cupcakes that were part of the props in that film, and given a great deal of time to do it. But I'll tell you something, Jamie, this was another thing that was crucial to me, was that I did not want to make a jump. I wanted to have this be another opportunity for me to learn and to work and to provide something and to, have it be in my artillery,
Yeah.
But I also really, really wanted that for the rest of the model shop. And they were resistant, but I wanted not, a lot of them were going through some of the training with me. I just don't think they loved it very much, but we could all see that the model shop was waning. That everybody wanted computer graphics. All these films, these production companies were like, the films were like planes, like hovering over ILM, just like waiting for clearance to come into land. And they were holding off their schedules so that ILM could work on these things. Wow. So that was the atmosphere. It was like, oh yeah, everybody wanted this thing, and nobody was all that interested in the model shop anymore, because that was old hat. But of course, there wasn't enough opportunity. There wasn't enough bandwidth for CG to cover all the demands. And of course, Model Shop did some of their biggest, best work on like the prequels. Those were huge times for the Model Shop. However, one thing, if I could dial back time and change the way that things were set up in the company, they had a policy that they would take a shot and they would give it to the Model Shop to bid, and they would give it to CG to bid. Huh. And whoever came in cheapest got the job. And I talk about creating a resistance between the two departments. And it was really an unhealthy time, because people were pitted against each other. And of course, understandably, the Model Shop were very frightened. And I was frightened for them too. It wasn't just Model Shop, but it was also like, optical and all these other things, stagehands. And I wanted to be sure that if those guys and gals had at least given it a chance, then they would know that they were making an educated choice to say no to it. So I went back and forth, and I had a job and during Casper, I was given the job of running this big shoot for Dragonheart, this big giant hydraulics head of a dragon that went over to somewhere in East Central Europe to shoot. But I was met with some pretty frosty welcome when I tried to go back from the CG department and work on a job back in the model shop.
Right.
And I don't know that I should go into too many details about that, but this was an awful time for me, actually. I was toughened up because I'd had years of kind of saying, okay, just focus on the job, Jean. That is the number one thing you have to do, is focus on the work. And of course, it's important to collaborate, but don't let somebody throw a wrench in it if you see a path forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, these people who were in the model shop, some of them, of course, not all of them, but they were but the entire model shop were family to me and remain so.
Mm-hmm.
We are an incredibly close-knit group of people. And it's partly because we're just, the model shop is a particularly wonderful group. Like it just, if you look at all these personalities and skill sets, I'll never experience anything like it again. And this the chemistry of all these people working together, but it's made us incredibly close. And to this day, if somebody's, we have wonderful reunion parties. If somebody needs something, we step up and help each other. Well, this family were some of them were in real opposition to me being back there again with them. And I just really had to just try and remember that one of my big motives, I know this makes me sound terribly altruistic and all that, but was that I wanted to be able to make sure that door was open and that people were crossing back and forth. And in fact, John Burton in the CG department, when he interviewed me to train me, he said, "Okay, Jean, I want you to absolutely commit to being a computer graphics artist."
Right.
And I said, I literally had behind my back, my fingers crossed, and I said, "Yeah, of course I'll do that." I had absolutely zero intention of turning my back on my work in the model shop and my people. I just wanted to sort of say, look, this is a whole nother set of tools, and they're available to any of you. We should all be able to feel that we have the opportunity to try it.
And I guess part of that kind of conflict was born out of the fact that it wasn't necessarily apparent what was the best tool for each particular job at that time. Was it models? Was it was it pushing further into the CG world? But great to see, like on a film like The Phantom Menace, and I think not a lot of people really realize actually how much model work is in that movie.
Yeah.
A hell of a lot.
Tremendous.
But you were working with view paint by this time, doing the textural stuff. Can you describe how you do that job? I've got an idea in my mind of what it looks like, but what is your kind of day-to-day working as a view paint texture painter or supervisor later on, as you were on the Phantom Menace?
Well, it's, basically it's doing the same thing that I did in the model shop when I was painting a model, but I was painting on a flat surface. There was a lot more preparation to make it work. All sorts of mathematical formulas had to happen and lay out things to make sure that the textures that were painting would actually find their way correctly onto the model. So, and that would take actually weeks and weeks to set up, whereas now it takes moments.
And that was a proprietary, like internal software, was it, View Paint? That was.
Yes, it was. And Dennis Muren said that was the big leap on Jurassic. Well, of course, I like to think so because that was what I was doing. But before that, with the Mercury, Man, the T2 work, the paint, it really didn't have a surface that told you a story about this thing, that it was rusty or that it was scarred or that it was, had iridescence or later on feathers and hair and all that stuff. So that when they were when people were actually to get their hands on a Wacom and paint on those dinosaurs was one of the biggest leaps about that whole show.
That was John Schlag and all those guys that were, I was talking about that shot. I think it was to Dennis Muren when I spoke to him about that shot of the T-Rex when it came out from the darkness behind when the fence breaks, and just how that shot still holds up now. And he was talking just about how well it was comped and the textural work on it and everything. And that's the thing, I think people just go, they think Jurassic Park, they think Dennis Muren, they think Phil Tippett, and now they probably think Steve Williams, Spaz as well. But there's so many other people behind doing a shot like that. And I think I always try and make an effort in these interviews to try and point out that, there are people involved in every single aspect of it. It's not just somebody's just given this shot and it's their job to do that shot. And I've never spoken to a textural artist before, but I'm kind of wondering how, and you'd mentioned this earlier actually about the render time, because obviously when you're working on a model, you're able to see the results instantly, step back, decide, have a proper look at it,
Oh
decide
yeah.
whether you want to change it or, take away from it or add to it. With the CG work, particularly in those early days, what was it? A render might last a whole evening while you were
Oh yeah.
asleep, and then there's a
Oh
problem
yeah.
with it the next morning, and you have to start again. I mean, that's the difference between
Exactly.
a good and a bad day, right?
Well, you put that perfectly, because that is exactly my feeling when I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and get to work. And it was all about my render. And if I had a good render, I had a good day. But, and that goes right up to now. Oh, I'm still an employee at ILM.
Mm,
But that I love that feeling of getting up and seeing what transpired overnight. And often you're horrified, because it's not, it's something you didn't hit the right button, or just, it's gone wrong. And yeah, that's a kind of a rhythm of working that was hard to get used to
mm,
when we were used to being on the set and just like get out a big brayer and just spray something and just stand back and, okay, good, you're done, shoot. The timing of waiting. And then also the other thing that I still to this day have issues with. I really loved in the early days of ILM is that you would get a couple of takes and then that was it. And then they'd show the dailies the next day. And, unless it was a disaster, which sometimes, like something would happen, something get incinerated or something while somebody was working on it. But basically that, you had the camera in front of it on the set and they took several takes and then you were done. And
yeah.
there might be some tweaks that roto and paint could do to something, and the comping could do something with it. But basically, it wasn't this thing where you had this infinite ability to keep minutely incrementing something over
Hmm.
and over and over. And it is a little bit hard, I think, to keep your spirits up, because there's nothing I love more than like early in a project when everything, the sky's the limit, and there's a sketch and that's all. And I generally, and I still do that, is just go out and get my own reference photos and try to find something unusual that no one's ever seen before. Like, I remember I called these women from the bat, these women that were bat experts, and they brought a bat with them, and I spread the wing out, live bat, on a light box, and took photos of that. And I went to this place where this guy had an incredible collection of minerals and shot photos of minerals, because we wanted to get Ultron to have a look of something that they always want something they've never seen before. And in fact, it's not that hard to find if you really just go out into the world and look at what's out there in nature. You will find something that surprises you.
Yeah.
But after that, once that initial thing happens and things, you get it like 80% there, and it's all just it's a great pathway to seeing what it's going to be like. Then you really have to have the kind of stamina to see it through and to still care about it, when something is just being really minutely tweaked. And that has become, more and more the standard of what we have to do, to
Mm,
complete a shot. I don't resent it or anything like that, really, but I do sometimes think back to those days in the model shop where something was so, this was your shot, and this was your opportunity to get it right. And the director had to be creative with what he was given too, So yeah, kind of miss those that aspect of the work.
yeah. Yeah. I would. You were talking earlier about how the people in the model shop are very much family and still are, and I wonder if that's something to do with the collaborative nature of working on a single piece together. And although that happens in the digital world, you're not physically necessarily in the same space as you're doing it. You might go off to your booth or to your office to work on that. And I wonder if that's part of the thing that you miss, is about kind of being in that same space with people, and but both having your hands on on a model and painting it.
I think that's crucial, but I still think you can recreate that. And I feel like the San Francisco ILM group, I just finished a project working on Indiana Jones. And luckily enough, they pulled together a lot of us older people, who've known each other. Like the vast majority of that tight crew had been working together for at least 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And so I think we have some of that family feeling, that we had in the model shop, just because we've been through battle together for so long, and we had been in each other's, we had been physically together, so all that time. I wonder about the future of a visual effects work when you don't have that kind of proximity. But I'm not trying to say that I think it won't work, because I've seen so many changes at ILM, and so many times, that we feared that some new approach was going to change the nature of our company. I mean, I really believe I have such a strong attachment to that place and that legendary company that George made. There is I still feel that, I still feel that way about, even though it has expanded and we've got companies, we've got people working in all different countries, people who don't know each other. I still think there is something there's a maintenance from that, the sense of the reputation of the place that I think still stands. That's hopefully always will.
Yeah, it's good to hear that heart kind of still exists there. And that's the thing, there are very few companies, probably not just in VFX but anywhere, where there are people that have been there for, you think of like Dennis only left a few years ago. I mean, he was there for decades, I did wonder with VFX, because you think of those kind of milestone movies, obviously Star Wars, and then sort of optically complicated Return of the Jedi, and then Willow, and young Sherlock Holmes for the CGI, and then of course Jurassic Park, Abyss, Jurassic Park, and so on. I wondered if at some point the effects technology would kind of plateau and it would end up being used purely as a storytelling device rather than let's see something new, let's find a new wow moment on the screen. But it seems that companies like ILM are still always kind of pushing forward, always trying to push the envelope and find themselves in new territory. How does somebody like yourself, working through that period, through the 90s and onwards, how did you find the challenge of kind of keeping abreast of the new technological changes? Is it because
that's a good question, because man, it's not easy.
Yeah. Because I would imagine, like, you one job you're working, one show you're working on version 1 of some software, and then by the time you reach the next show, it could be version 10, and the tool set's changed completely.
You've hit it on the head, Jamie. That is one of the big challenges for me. And the thing is, there are plenty of people in the company, people doing my job, who are much better at it than I am, and they are younger and they're sharper, and they can pick up software quicker than I can. And I've always been conscious about that. But the thing is, I got to the point where pretty quickly I didn't care if people knew that I didn't know how to do something. And I managed to I keep thinking, every time I got a new show, they'd give me something, I would be like, God, I've tricked them again. Like they still see some reason to keep me around, even though I feel the struggle. But then if you talk to other people, you find out that they're all sensing it the same. You think we're the only one. You think, oh, I'm alone. I'm really having to constantly feel like I'm battling to keep up and keep on top of things. I don't think I'm alone in that feeling. And I think it is very much the nature of the business right now, is there's tremendous pressure on people to stay abreast of what's the bleeding edge of the latest ways and best ways and most efficient ways, because of course that's always the pressure now, is how can everything be done, more work done in less time. That you can't hold on to old tools and be expected to keep up.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I probably won't leave this in, but just as an aside, I work in live TV, as I said, and I work as a kind of live editor, I guess you call it. And the equipment we use has been used for a quarter of a century. It has not changed.
Whoa.
They've added to it, but it's been there for a quarter of a century. Right now, in the last 24 months, a new iteration, like a brand new way of doing it, has arrived. And the resistance is unbelievable from the old crews. People just are scared of change, aren't they? That's the
Oh
thing.
yeah. And well, I mean, that's a luxury to be able to feel that you have mastered the tool set that you have,
Almost.
because yeah.
I'm kind of interested in what your place of work looks like. Like, as somebody who's doing all this textural stuff, do you have like fabric hanging on the wall and fur hanging on the wall and photographs plastered all over the place for each particular job you're working on?
Yes, I definitely did that. In fact, I don't have that around me quite so much right now at this moment, but I remember Lynn Brennan giving a tour when we're still before COVID, and she's coming into the room, and I have this huge array of bones and snake skins and feathers and rocks and rusty metal and all that, and she's like, and here's Jean and all of Jean's creepy things, and I didn't think they were creepy, and I thought they were absolutely beautiful. But yeah, that's something I usually am I try to surround myself with whatever it is that I'm working on, to have as many visual examples of it as possible, and set up boards and do collages and things, so that I'm inspired by real things. Dennis was always very very big on that. He'd bring an elephant to ILM so that people could watch the movement and see it, to see it yourself.
Yeah.
And so I was always a big follower of that, and I believe in that, because it's so easy to just Google something and then you take that and use it.
Yeah.
But it is the truth that you do, that quote that I gave earlier about, when you see it on the screen and you can smell it, that's when you know that you're getting somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that it's easy to get to that place if you don't have some firsthand, in your face examples of what it is that you're going for.
Yeah, Dennis was talking quite a lot about that. He's a big proponent of that idea, isn't he? Observing reality. And I asked him about, has he ever thought about writing a book? And he kind of lifted this manuscript from beneath his desk and said, this is it. Maybe one day, my wife keeps trying to make me do it. And I said, well, listen, I know a lot of people would be interested in reading that. And he said, well, okay, maybe one day.
Thank you. He's been working on that a long time, and I
Yeah.
used to love to stop in his office because I'd have stuff up on his screen, and he would spend generous time with me, talking about, like, this is why this shot works. This is something. This is the thing. I mean, I think one of the high water marks from ILM is his collaboration with Spielberg on War of the Worlds, which is is a film that kind of came and went, but watching and knowing, understanding, and listening to Dennis talk about how they collaborated together, so that because they had almost no budget compared to most things that come in and out of the company, and because there was these two minds together who understood visual effects so well, they were able to really get the maximum out of that. And I think it's a good subject for people who are interested in visual effects to study, directors to study, and so, like, how did they do that, and like what were they, it was so sparing and yet it was so effective.
That sequence, I was talking to Dennis about this, that sequence with the freeway and the kind of trucks kind of rolling off it and the bridge disintegrating. I remember I was saying to Dennis, I think that I realized I was holding my breath when that scene was over. I just kind of really kind of hits you full in the chest.
Well, and why it worked was because Dennis and Spielberg understood that the reason that thing would have the maximum impact is if the camera was in the position of the viewer, of Tom Cruise. If that camera went up into that bridge and you had a close-up of the car exploding or something, you would be taken away from the sense that you had that you were actually the protagonist in that film.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like you could talk about a shot that somebody else did that you admire, but how do you feel about shots that you worked on? Can you see them? as a viewer, or are you kind of going, oh, I remember that bit there, that wasn't quite how I wanted it?
I used to think to myself, and when we were all gathered together, and we still do that. And the show that, like the last show I worked on, we still collected every week, at least once, in premiere in the big screening room, and to see the work properly on the big screen is crucial, and to see it together. And there's things that I really hope that we never get to the point where we don't have the opportunity to look at the work on a huge screen, because that's what you notice, the details and things that really matter that you can't see on your little computer screen.
And
but
this is each other's work as well. This is, so you're observing everybody's work. Yeah. And
yes, all together.
Open feedback sessions. Yeah.
Exactly. ILM's always been good at that. It's always been like, if you see something, I mean, kind of, you do have to watch, when do you speak? It's important to know when. It's important to keep your mouth shut too, because not everything matters. But to that point, I used to think that everybody in watching that movie had their own film in their head, and they were looking at the thing that they worked on that they didn't like. And, that they were dying to kind of correct it. I mean, I don't think I've ever worked on anything where I didn't have a sense that I would like to go in and tweak it. And, yes and no, you do. But generally speaking, it's really hard to ever feel that anything is good enough. I mean, you just, at some point, the effects soup says that's it, or the director, and you walk away, because it's never going to be perfect. It just won't. Yeah. And especially as we're chasing photoreal, that's a rabbit hole that will, be endlessly impossible to achieve, I think.
And surely part of your demeanor, your personality of being an artist is about improving each time, and is being able to learn from your previous, not mistakes, but your previous work. And that's what kind of drives you forward. So of course you're never going to kind of look at something and pat yourself on the back and say that was perfect. I mean, maybe it happens occasionally, but
once in a while, I have to say, and not just with my work, but there is a lovely feeling once in a while when you can just sit back and say, like, that was a really pretty shot. I remember Roger Guyette saying that Ridley Scott said to him once, okay, go for photoreal, but if it's not going to be photoreal, make sure that it's beautiful. And I like that idea that, sometimes photoreal is not necessarily the goal, but, once in a while to be able to just sit back and to say, that is a beautiful shot. I had that experience, several times on this show that I'm just finished my part in. And I love that. And I look forward to seeing that properly in the cinema, to see if that's going to hold up, because you just never know how things are going to be. And, it's always a mystery until you're sitting there watching it when it's finished. It's always a surprise.
And they always come under so much scrutiny now, films and, effects. I mean, people are really wise to the technologies. There's a lot of people online who will kind of tear a film apart. And it upsets me when that happens, because, there might be a shot that might look a little bit wonky. But if you're kind of noticing that, then maybe it's the storytelling that isn't actually working, perhaps.
Thank you. Yes, I know there's so much brutality out there with people's judgment on our work, isn't there? I mean, they just can't wait to pile on and sound superior about it. I mean, Indiana Jones is going to be an interesting project when it's released, because I think it's because it's such a beloved, series of movies. And that's another reason it's a real honor to work on a film that I know is going to be getting that much attention.
Yeah. Did you give yourself the chance to kind of look back and think, hang on, I've worked on Star Wars movies, Indiana Jones movies, Marvel movies, all these huge, I hate the word franchises, but all these huge films and series that mean so much to people. Do you give yourself the chance to kind of look at that and go, that's pretty good?
You know what, Jamie? One of my favorite things that I worked on, and that I can have this, my feeling of feeling proud about it, is as much as any other thing I've ever done, was a commercial for Control cat litter. And we had these cats on a fence, and
What year was this? Do
I
you
don't.
remember when this was? Like, what period are we talking? Is this is CGI, right?
No,
No, this is
no.
model
This was
work.
back in the model shop, and it was yeah, no, a little bit after Willow. Um, but I don't care what it is, the outcome of it, actually. I mean, like I said, it's an honor to work on
Mm,
Indiana Jones, but at the same time, I was, I was so happy to work on that cat litter commercial because we just had it turned out really well. And I think you have to, and plus the collaborative experience, the whole experience of it was so much fun. And I I think that the moment that you start caring about the end product,
yeah.
which I had nothing much to do with, nobody ever asked me about a script or a casting or any of
Mm,
those kind of
mm,
decisions. I find the thing that I worked on, and I can love that,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
I can care about it just as much, on a commercial as I can on a Star Wars movie.
Mm. That's really important, isn't it? To find your kind of joy, your little nugget of joy buried in that huge, huge production.
Well, you're so right. And I think that's why sometimes it makes me feel a little bit sorry when I hear people feeling like they've been slighted,
Mm,
because I would never ever be able to feel that way. Getting credit for my work is like, that's not what it's about. It's like it's about waking up in the morning and like having a good render. It's about being able to lose myself in the job that I'm doing.
mm.
And once it's out of my hands, I'm on to the next thing. I don't care if I get a credit on the film or any of that. I'm much more interested in just the day in, day out, and the pleasure of doing this thing that I've actually really loved doing for 35 years. Well, more like 40 years.
Yeah, it's the experience. I want to ask you one final question because I'm aware we've been chatting for an hour and 15 here. I don't
Okay.
want to keep you
Oops.
too
Okay.
long. No, no, it's
I'm
fine. I'm happy with
going on.
the length of it. No, it's great. It's fantastic. I don't want to keep you. I could talk to you for days. Um, it is a big question, so it's probably unfair to leave it to the end. But in doing this podcast, I think you'll be my 68th episode, and you'll be the third woman that I've spoken to, I think. Fourth woman that I've spoken to out of those 60 odd episodes. I'm focusing kind of on 70s, 80s, 90s, sometimes newer films. And it kind of speaks to that period that I'm talking about, that women didn't belong in the industry at that time in those roles. What do you think is maybe one of the solutions to encourage young women, girls even at school age, to be able to enter into the industry and feel that they actually do have a place there?
I think it's terribly important to catch them early. That's why I do always, whenever I've been asked if I could go and speak to a high school, or even earlier, actually, so that they can see that there's a woman. They can look at me, hopefully, or some of the other women that do my similar jobs, and say, that's a job that I could do. And if you don't have representation, they're not going to aspire to it.
Mm,
So I think that's crucial. I firmly believe I think there's more women coming up in the industry and are being encouraged to do so. I think I get together. I have a group of women that I love we're all Academy members at ILM, and we get together and do a Zoom like every other week. And we came up with a list of things that we thought would be important, and we gave them to executives at ILM.
mm,
And there's just a couple of things. One thing that does not tend to happen with women, and it happens more naturally with men, is that kind of collaborative mentoring that happens where somebody is taken under the wing.
uh-huh.
And women, I think, for whatever reason, they were rushing home because they had kids, or they just, were not they weren't collecting together in a way that gave them the somebody to mentor them.
Mm,
So to make sure that that's actively going on is important. I also think that it would be really cool if more women were able to do job sharing.
Yeah.
So that, because women tend to step back, and if they want to have a family, it's really on the women. We've always known that. That really hasn't changed much. Working from home is helping, I think, but still the pressure on women to do a full-time job and raise a family makes, if they could have more of a two people together sharing an important role, I think would really help to see more women rising up and taking on more responsibility.
Because otherwise you kind of hit that ceiling, don't you? Because I've heard it in my part of the industry where I've heard bosses saying, well, there's no point promoting her because she's going to have a kid in a couple of years, you know? And it's horrible to hear, but there is a certain reality to that, and maybe job sharing is the key to that. I know when I spoke to, I think I mentioned this to Rose when I spoke to her a couple of weeks ago, that I interviewed Paul Franklin, who worked for DNEG over here, and he was saying that he thinks that that might be the key to getting young women into the industry, is just kind of showing them that there is still a ladder to climb, there is still a path forged ahead for them, and it's not just I work to this point, have a child and leave, and then try and get back in after maternity leave. So
exactly,
yeah.
exactly, to support, for them to have more support, to be able to do, because I was lucky enough, I had two kids and was able to work. I worked part-time for years at ILM, and that was a great privilege for me to be able to do that. Not very many women can work part-time, and that was partly because I always had a right-hand person there who would take on the meetings and things that I couldn't go to. So
there's a great little video of you on YouTube, actually, where I don't know what year it was, but somebody came along and shot a video with you and showed you at work and then kind of rushing off to pick up the kids and all of that. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes as well, because it was a nice little insight into your life at that time.
Yeah, Jeff Light did that.
Yeah, that's right. It was, yeah. What's left for you now? What's kind of your aim at the moment? You've, as I say, you've worked for ILM for a very long time. You've gone through different departments, different roles. Where do you see your kind of your happy place right now?
Well, I'm really excited about the next chapter. I wrote my letter of resignation, which was really hard to do, and I sent that off right before Christmas. After 35 years, I'm actually going back to the thing that it motivated me early on. And I'm going back to the old model shop at ILM, which still is in existence there. The main stage is still there. And all the tools, all this stuff, all the woodworking tools, all the toxic chemicals, the spray booth and the vac form machine and all that is there. And I'm going to do my own work. And my intention is to make, because I'm really fascinated with electronics, and I'm also fascinated with anything that I realized early on, like before Henson's, that art is, it's great to be able to do painting. That's, I'm going to do more of my own painting. But when something moves, everybody gets captivated by it. And that, Henson realized that with the animatronics and so I want to make automata, like old Victorian automata that turn with a crank. And so I have all these designs, and I've started even in on some of those things. And that's going to kind of take me back to my early beginnings in the subject matter, and also in the location where I'm going to be going kind of back home again. So I'm really excited about that. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. And you asked, every question that you asked seemed to be something that was really, really relevant to, like,
oh, good.
A change or a turning point for me. So thank you.
Well, when I started doing this 2 years ago, it was very much outside my comfort zone, but I feel like I'm slowly honing my skills.
Definitely. That was terrific. All
Thanks.
right. Well,
All right, thanks,
I thank Rose for recommending me.
Yeah,
I'm going to write to her right now.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with the great Jean Bolte there. Thank you to Jean for your time, and to Ian at ILM for helping organise it in an official capacity. Just a quick update on the Not Your Average Joe documentary that my buddy Patrick and I are working on. Despite not reaching our Kickstarter goal, we've not let it dampen our enthusiasm for the project. In fact, we've just booked flights to LA to interview Joe some more, as well as interview a writer, I'm not going to say who yet, an actor, a special effects supervisor, and a very well-known creator of creatures, and he's a showrunner as well. All out of our own pocket, of course, so the Bennings will not be going on vacation this year. But hey, time waits for no man. If you're going to do these things, you've got to do them. Next up, I have composer Stu Phillips. I've already spoken to VFX artist Hal Hickel, who was great to talk to. I'm due to speak with VFX legend Ken Ralston soon as well. Excited about that one. I've just lined up an interview with Van Ling as well. If you don't know the name Van Ling, just look him up. And if you're anything like me, you have to give him a lot of thanks for his great work. I'm thinking of those laser discs and DVDs he made back in the day, but he's had a really interesting and varied career. Oh, and I've just arranged a date to speak to VFX wizard Todd Vaziri. If you're on Twitter, you might know Todd. He's just tweeting all the time about VFX, and he's great to talk to. I've only chatted to him via DM so far and on Twitter. But we're going to have our conversation in the next few weeks. I'm also still trying to get costume designer Marlene Stewart, who I first contacted, I think, in 2021. I just need to speak to people who aren't so busy, But we are getting closer to setting a date, which is good. And while I'm in LA, if time allows, in March, while we're there for our documentary, I am intending to do some podcast recordings too. So Mark Hamill, if you're listening, you're just down the road from there. Just let me pop down and we'll have a chat. I won't even chat about Star Wars. I won't ask you those boring questions. I'll talk about Slipstream and The Guyver and Batman and maybe reprising your role as Luke Skywalker. Maybe. It's all go here, really. Got the podcast, got my regular work, got the documentary, also doing the book with Justin Berger, The Unofficial Timeline of Return of the Jedi, which we're working on to release on May the 25th this year. So not long to go now. And the F1 season is about to start, which is some of my more regular work. So my calendar's looking pretty full, and I feel really super grateful to be in that position as a freelancer. But I am keeping in mind I need room for the podcast and the documentary too. So I'm doing less of my normal work, I guess, to accommodate that stuff. Because, I've got to get it out. I've got to do it. Because otherwise, it's just the same old. And you look back and you think, what have I actually achieved? Well, I'd like to look back this time next year and think, well, I've made a documentary, and maybe by then I'll have done, 80 podcasts or something. But anyway, I'm waffling now. Thanks always for your support on the podcast. Please tell your friends and family about how great it is. Leave a comment particularly on Apple Podcasts, because that helps it get seen and heard by more people. And thanks for joining me. And I hope you can do so again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.